Å skille fakta fra fake, sant fra usant, vår store oppgave. Og vi skal først til Filippinene, Kristoffer, og Maria Ressa.
Ja, vi skal høre fra en av dem som virkelig har fått kjenne på kroppen hvordan det å utfordre statsmakten, og ikke minst presidenten, i et land som går i klar autoritær retning. Maria Ressa en erfaren journalist. Hun var blant annet sjef for CNN i Filippinene i mange år, før hun startet nettavisen Rappler, som har vært veldig kritisk, gjort veldig mye godt journalistisk arbeid for å avdekke president Dutertes måten han fører sin krig mot narkolangere på. Og det har gitt henne søksmål på søksmål, og hun har blitt arrestert flere ganger. Hun står i fare for å havne i fengsel snart. Hun skulle ha vært på SKUP i 2019, men det kunne hun ikke på grunn av disse problemene hun har hatt med lovverket, som ser ut til å bli tilpasset delvis for å straffe henne. I fjor kunne hun heller ikke være med, for da avlyste vi jo SKUP. Men i år så vi så heldige at vi har fått med oss Maria Ressa fra Rappler på Filippinene. Men aller først så skal vi få se på en liten videosnutt.
Push this down. We have 61.8. Threatened to break the law. You said you had killed it.
This campaign will continue.
Any of the traditional moves.
Wow.
Is it important that people be afraid of you? Fear.
Yes.
But Mr. President, as president, it could be surprising. I love you guys. I appeal again. Don't be afraid. Because if you don't use your rights, you will lose them.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome journalist and Rappler CEO, Maria Ressa.
Maria Ressa, we've waited for several years to welcome you here to SKUP, and finally, welcome.
Thanks for having me. I'm sad we're not in person, but close enough for now, right?
This will have to do, considering both the pandemic and the fact that you're restricted when it comes to travel. But hopefully someday in the future we can invite you to Oslo in person. Now, I want to start off with, there's a documentary out now. It's called 1,000 Cuts, and it tells the story of Rappler and of you and all you've been through for the past couple of years. Everyone should watch it, obviously, including people in the Philippines. But none of the TV stations in the Philippines have agreed to publish it or to send it. Now, what does that tell you about the situation right now in the Philippines when it comes to the freedom of speech?
Everyone says there's a chilling effect. I'd say we're in Siberia. But you know what? I think Filipino journalists are doing their best, our best. There's certainly a price for being outspoken. You can see, I've had 10 arrest warrants in less than 2 years. So in a way, I'm a cautionary tale. Rappler is a cautionary tale in the same way that the largest broadcaster, ABS-CBN, didn't get its franchise renewed. So May 5th, ABS-CBN, the largest broadcaster in the Philippines, went off the air. And the last time that happened was in 1972 when Ferdinand Marcos declared martial law. Well, in these conditions, President Duterte didn't have to declare martial law to close it down.
I mean, you've spent 10 years in Indonesia. You've seen that society go from an authoritarian system to a democratic system, and now you're seeing it move in the opposite direction in the Philippines. I mean, how can you tell in sort of everyday things that you're experiencing in the Philippines that things are moving in the wrong direction?
You mentioned this in the film, it's death by 1,000 cuts. I am absolutely certain that my rights have been violated. That happened, I know the date, February 13th, when I was arrested in my office, and then the government wanted me to feel their power. So instead of allowing me to post bail immediately, they just delayed and delayed until they detained me for the night. So I posted bail on Valentine's Day. But it's not just me. In fact, I'm lucky compared to other journalists. There's a journalist who has been in prison for more than a year now, Frenchie May Cumpio. There's another journalist, the editor-in-chief of Manila Today. Her name is Lady Anne Salem. She was arrested December 10th last year, was held in prison. A little more than a month ago, a judge actually ruled that the arrest warrant used against her was illegal. And yet, she was still kept in prison for another month. She was just released, but then that judge who ruled in her favor has now been red tagged. You know, this very strange Filipino thing where it used to be a tactic of the military to red tag, to name someone like a communist, i.e. you are a terrorist. And during these times when there's an anti-terror law, this anti-terror law, if you're a terrorist, in quotes, you could be arrested without a warrant and then imprisoned for up to 24 days.
And this is quite explicit. I mean, and it has been for a long time. And we see this in the documentary as well, that Duterte is very clear when it comes to how he sees journalists as a threat. I mean, and you've met him several times. You've sat down for interviews with him. How do you deal with that when you're sitting face to face with someone who explicitly says that he wants you arrested and thrown in jail?
So it's funny, he hasn't said that to my face, but what he has said is that he's killed up to 3 people. That's the first time I interviewed him in a long time. So he remembered I had interviewed him in the late 80s, but I interviewed him in October 2015. This was in the film. And then after he became president at the palace, where he just said that, I was trying to understand the psyche of a man who was now going to be leading our country. He admitted that his leadership style included using violence and fear, and that's necessary. So this is his mindset, right? And in that sense, it's confusing, because the first time I'd interviewed him, in a weird way, it was refreshing to have someone so honest, I guess. No, it was politicians didn't speak this way, but then over time, he actually delivered his promises, which was that if he was elected, blood would flow, and it did. So this is one of the things. And starting in 2016, part of the reason we came under attack is that we held the government to account for the changing numbers of the drug war, right? This very brutal drug war that our own Commission on Human Rights, after about 3 years, said that there were 27,000 people killed. Until today, the biggest casualty in our battle for truth is exactly how many people have died.
And also, I guess, putting a face and a name to these people who died, so they're not just faceless and nameless criminals on the street. I mean, how important has that been to raise awareness about what's going on in the Philippines, that you've actually put names and faces on the people who are killed in this war on drugs?
It's incredibly important, but as the numbers get higher and we debate the numbers, there's almost a dehumanizing, desensitizing effect. In many instances, and the studies have shown this, right? When you have a large number, it doesn't have the same impact as having 1 or 2 people killed whom you know. So we've done what journalists do, which is to let you know that a 5-year-old kid was shot and killed, right? And to tell you about the people who were killed. But it's actually quite shocking for me that Filipinos online are saying it's okay to kill. That's shocking. But again, part of that, I blame social media. It is, in many instances, it is a narrative that's been seeded online and has it, like a virus of lies, it's infected a lot of people. So it's very easy for people to say, well, kill them. Our president says it, of course, right? So the world has turned upside down for me, and I don't believe our values have changed. This country is one of the first signatories to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I believe that's still a value, and we continue to do our reporting as if it is.
it was very clear when I saw this documentary to see the similarities between what's been happening in the Philippines and what's been happening in a country like the US. And it happened a bit before. I mean, to what extent was the disinformation campaigns, the trolling campaigns, the threats against journalists, to what extent was this a preview, what happened in the Philippines, to what happened in the US later?
You know, I started raising the alarm in 2016. And I really had the first link. I started pulling the thread after Cambridge Analytica whistleblower Christopher Wiley. I remember this big scandal, right, in 2018. He called the Philippines. He said that Cambridge Analytica, which had gathered data, our data, and then was used to essentially manipulate Americans in elections, right? In different, actually more than Americans, many different people all around the world. He called the Philippines a petri dish. He said that Cambridge Analytica and its parent company, SCL, was using countries like the Philippines with weak law enforcement, a lack of a rule of law, was using countries like this to test these tactics of mass manipulation. And if it worked in our countries, then they would take the tactic, and his word was port it over to the West, right, to America. So essentially, we were the guinea pig, and the U.S. presidential elections, Hillary Clinton, they were the targets. But this began in 2016, and I think the other part that's difficult in this is the Philippines is really like a petri dish, because this is our 6th year that Filipinos spend the most time online and on social media globally, right? 6 years in a row. So we are, we're predisposed. We were the texting capital of the world before social media, and now 100% of Filipinos on the internet are on Facebook. So Facebook is essentially our internet.
Do you feel that these social media companies are taking that threat seriously enough, that they're dealing with it in a way that that can help prevent the spread of disinformation in a country like the Philippines?
You know, Rappler is a Facebook partner, right? We're a fact-checking partner. We're one of 2 Filipino fact-checking partners of Facebook. And we knew Facebook better than Facebook did. In fact, Rappler started as a Facebook page. Look, the methodology is the same. These bottom-up exponential attacks, and then those same exponential attacks on social media, a lie told 1 million times becomes a fact. Then it comes top-down from the leader, and then that leader uses the levers of government, the levers of a democracy, and crumbles it from within. America just stopped short in the last presidential elections because its institutions were stronger. There was a huge debate about whether then President Trump, should have been taken off the platform. The Facebook Oversight Board is still debating this, right? I am part of the real Facebook Oversight Board, which was launched a month before the US presidential elections, precisely to pressure Facebook. It's a long-winded answer to say it is too little, too late, right? But in a country like the Philippines, we're about to walk into our presidential elections. It's already political season here. Weak law and order, endemic corruption, patronage-driven politics. I have 10 arrest warrants in less than 2 years. You know, the cost for journalists are incredibly high. Facebook has got to do more. Social media has got to do more. And I guess the last part I'd say on this is, over the last few years, from 2016 to 2021, we've seen social media become a behavior modification system. And it's been that way. It's insidiously manipulating us, putting these micro-targeting, custom audiences, ways to sell us, right? Every single thing we post is pulled together into a model. That model knows us better than we know ourselves. This is machine learning. And then all of those models pulled together by artificial intelligence to deliver us our weakest moment to a message, to an advertiser, or to a government. These things can't hold, because if we debate facts, if lies repeated a million times become facts, if you don't have facts, then you can't have truth, you cannot have trust. And if you don't have these three, then, democracy as we know it, and forget just democracy, any meaningful human endeavor, dealing with climate change, dealing with coronavirus, all this becomes impossible.
And I guess that happens gradually, and it comes sneaking up on you as well. This erosion of truth and facts. Have you, since you're the target of a lot of this misinformation, and Rappler is a target of it, have you ever felt threatened by gaslighting, that you've started doubting some of what you regard to be true yourself? I guess what I'm asking, do they ever get to you? Do they ever manage to get through with their disinformation even to you?
Of course. When we came out with our weaponization of the internet, it's a 3-part series. I wrote 2 of the 3 parts. The 3rd part was written by a co-founder of Rappler. I took 2 weeks, because right after that, the series was published, I got pounded by an average of 90 hate messages per hour. And when that happened, my first instinct was to step back and look at the data. Was I wrong? Did I do anything wrong? And I started responding to all the answers, but they came at such a fast pace. And when I went to Facebook, they said, report it. It's, even if I were to report it, 24 hours in a day isn't enough time to report that much abuse. So on March 8th, the International Center for Journalists just released an analysis of almost 500,000 social media posts. And it shows you that 60% of those attacks were meant to tear down my credibility. By this year, I'm 35 years a journalist, and I always thought that track record will stay with you. On social media, it doesn't, right? So 60% is to tear down credibility, to tear down trust. The other 40% is very visceral. It's misogynistic, it's sexist, it's dehumanizing. It is meant to just tear you down, to pound you to silence. Once I saw the data, and that's the critical part, you have to look at the data, and then you realize all of this is a weapon against you. And that's when I just, sucked it up and moved forward and told you that you are being manipulated, that we are being manipulated, and that we need to hold governments and social media platforms to account.
But that must be very challenging. I mean, with that onslaught of verbal assaults and attacks on you personally and for the work you do. And one thing is dealing with that yourself, but how does the public end up knowing what's true or not? If you look at the Philippines today, how informed is a 25-year-old person living in Manila when it comes to the political situation, when it comes to the human rights situation, and what's true or not?
Information is if you're really thinking, it's a thinking slow process, right? Daniel Kahneman wrote a book about the ways, biology, that we as human beings think, thinking fast, thinking slow. Social media is a thinking fast platform. It caters to your emotion. All the research has shown that lies laced with anger and hate spread faster and further on social media. In fact, the biggest problem that we have is actually a sentence by an American biologist. I quote him all the time. His name is E.O. Wilson. And he said that the crisis we're facing is our Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology. So when you ask a question like that, where journalism is a thinking slow process, information where you want to try to get to solve a problem, this is a thinking slow process. My worry is that we don't even get to the thinking slow process, because social media, which delivers the news, right? The world's largest, the platform that delivers the news today, the largest deliverer, Facebook. Facebook delivers the news, right? And yet that's the very same platform that also carries hate, disinformation, and conspiracy theories. So if you're on this, right, I worry that things like what happened in the United States in January 6th, right? The people who stormed the Capitol, they believed that they were doing the right thing. And yet, if you look at the data, and this is work by the Election Integrity Partnership, the meta-narrative of election fraud was seeded a year earlier in August 2019. 2019, August 2019. And it was seeded on RT, on Russia Today. And then it was picked up by Steve Bannon on YouTube. And he brings it out, and it's seeded on closed Facebook groups. And then a year later, in August 2020, Tucker Carlson, and then QAnon drops it, and then President Trump comes out with it a year later, right? So this is the meta-narrative coming into reality. The same way that in my situation, it was journalist equals criminal in 2016, journalist equals criminal in 2020, right? I was convicted. Which is reality, which isn't. So I guess what I'm saying is like this virus of lies that infects our information ecosystem through social media. This virus of lies infects real people. The conspiracy theories changes the worldviews of real people, and they act. They're goaded into action, and it will take far longer to rehabilitate, because the people who are infected are impervious to facts. This is our problem as journalists. You know, in many ways, we've not only lost the gatekeeping powers, news organizations always ask me, so how do we bring back trust? It isn't in our power right now, because the platforms that deliver the news are manipulating our biology.
But since you've gone through this process and seen how truth is eroded and how you've had this increased pressure from the people in power, what lessons have you learned that we might take advantage of outside the Philippines when it comes to methods that actually do work? Have you come across something along the way that we can actually do?
We're living this on a day-to-day basis, and I had to kind of stop and think, what's the strategy? What do we do, right? And we have 3 posts. We look at it with technology. We look at solution for technology, journalism, and community. Those 3 pillars. For technology, I was part of the Forum on Information and Democracy's Infodemics Working Group. November last year, we came out with a paper that outlined 12 systemic solutions for technology, to put guardrails on technology, 250 tactics. I'm looking closely at what the EU is doing with the legislation that it's working on. We're looking at the UK Online Harms Bill, Section 230, the way the US, the new Biden administration, is going to deal with Section 230. We're building our own platform, technology where our users can feel safe to challenge, to ask questions, right? So that's tech. Journalists, independent news groups are going to have to survive. It's part of the reason I'm on the strategic board of the International Fund for Public Interest Media, which is aiming to raise $1 billion every year to help independent media survive. And then beyond that, we also have to make sure that our communities survive this, right? So Rappler's elevator pitch when we started is that we build communities of action, and the food we feed our communities is the journalism. Well, our communities, insidiously manipulated, debating the facts, right? We're trying very hard to build these communities of action so that we can collaborate together. We can still work on climate change. We can look for facts. We can fact check together. I guess technology, journalism, community, right? Recognize the problem, then we look for ways to move it forward. But the most important step right now is that the business model of social media, what Shoshana Zuboff calls surveillance capitalism, those incentives are huge, and it is making money at the expense of our democracy, of our societies.
Maria Ressa, thank you so much for sharing your experiences and what at least I interpreted as a slightly hopeful message there at the end. And I look forward to welcoming you to SKUP in person at some point in the future. Thank you so much.
No, thanks for having me. Can I just add this one thing, which is you're right, I should end on a more hopeful note, right? I guess, the one thing I haven't said, right? It sounds so bleak, but strangely enough, I wake up every morning and I'm actually hopeful, and there's a certain excitement despite the bad. And that excitement is because this time matters, right? This year in the Philippines will determine what the next decade will look like. I think this year globally will determine so much. It's like when we step out after we get vaccinated, when we step out, we're going to step out onto a world where we're going to be standing on rubble because the world that was is gone. And for journalists at this point in time, I think we need to be thinking about what we want the world to be. What's the form and substance of journalism? What kind of societies do we want to build? And then, the good part is the old world wasn't that good. Maybe this is a time to rebuild better, right? We can certainly have more sustainable world, more equal. And that's why I keep going, I think, because we're building. This has to be it. We have to build better.
Excellent words to live by and to end this conversation with. Thank you so much, Maria Ressa, for joining us today.